Welcome to Hauntings at Dusk, true ghost stories and fiction UK with me, author Tina Vantyler. Today's episode is a true ghost story called Mrs. Wilcox from my book about haunted toys. I hope you enjoy it. When 5-year-old Callie spent time in hospital, her mother Joanna was grateful to hear a nurse had shown her daughter kindness. But one morning, Callie awoke holding a strange new toy in her arms, with a name that took Joanna by surprise. Mrs. Wilcox. Our daughter Callie had been admitted to hospital with a suspected asthma attack after she began wheezing and complaining of tightness in her chest. She was in for 2 nights and I was allowed to sleep in a recliner by her bed. Thank goodness it turned out not to be asthma, although doctors weren't sure what had caused her symptoms. Although Callie slept fine on the wards, I struggled to get some shut-eye due to noise from the medical staff coming and going along with the other kids and their families. Finally, exhausted, I conked out on the recliner at 6 a.m. on day 2. An hour later, the sound of my daughter's happy giggle woke me. "I lost Jilly Bobs," she said, "but a nice nurse gave me this while you were snoring, so that's okay." Jilly Bobs was her much-loved cuddly cloth doll, and there were usually plenty of tears when she went missing. I looked at the creature Callie was hugging. "Is that a monkey, lovey?" I asked, reaching for it. Callie swung her new toy behind her back. "This is Mrs. Wilcox," she said. I chuckled to myself. Callie liked to give her toys unusual names, and this one was clearly no exception. And if it stopped her crying over the loss of Jilly Bobs, then I was happy she'd got it. "We'll ask the staff to keep an eye out for Jilly Bobs," I said, "and we must thank the nurse for your new monkey friend." But what with the doctors discharging Callie, overloading me with information about medicines and what symptoms to look out for going forward, plus me frantically texting my husband Oscar to collect us, I forgot to do either. Strapping Callie in her car seat, still clutching Mrs. Wilcox, I got my first good look at the toy. Old, possibly vintage, and a sickly beige colour, it had a felt face with beady brown glass eyes and protruding lips sewn shut with thick black surgical thread. The body, arms and legs were covered in hairy nylon fabric, bald in patches with the chest whiskers completely rubbed off. My initial thought was that it was absolutely disgusting. "Why a nurse would give a 5-year-old such a horrible thing is beyond me," I remarked to Oscar after we'd put our daughter to bed later with her monkey. "I'm guessing she saw Callie was distressed when she woke to find Jilly Bob's gone, and that toy had been handy," he replied. "We do need to pass on our thanks to the hospital and put a call out for the lost doll. I'll send an email. You're right, the toy is a bit manky." He shuddered, reaching for his laptop. "Let's hope it doesn't come with its own brand of special hospital bugs." "That's it." I got to my feet. "You've worried me. I'm taking it." Upstairs, on the pillow next to a sleeping Callie, the monkey's head poked out from the bedding at an angle, the uppermost glass eye glittering in the light from the hallway. I grasped the creature and tugged. Held fast in Callie's arms, the movement woke her and, eyes snapping open, she fixed me with a shockingly direct stare before snarling, "Take your hands off Mrs. Wilcox." Surprised, I let go. "Or else," said Callie, closing her eyes. She'd gone back to sleep. I described the scene to Oscar. "In the space of a few hours, our sweet-natured little girl has become a snarling, possessive stranger," I said, nibbling at the flesh around my thumbnail as I always did when fretting. "I'm worried, Oscar." He caught my hand. "She's tiny and she's just been through the most stressful experience of her life so far. She was gasping to catch her breath a couple of days ago. Remember how scared we all were? And since then she's been in hospital being poked, prodded and tested. Of course she's not herself and she wants to hang on to a new toy. Just give her time, okay?" "Okay," I sighed, relieved I had Oscar there with his pragmatic approach to life. "I'll stick those pizzas in the oven and bring you a glass of wine," he continued. "Put your feet up. You've hardly slept yourself these past 2 nights. He left the room but, minutes later, called my name. "Joanna, come out here a sec." Thinking Oscar was going to ask if I wanted red or white wine, I went, smiling, to the doorway. "White, please," I began, then stopped as he glanced from me to the bottom of the stair. Mrs. Wilcox, last seen in my daughter's bed 10 minutes ago, sat, furry legs splayed, on the bottom stair, its sewn-up lips stretched in its usual ugly grimace. A wail began in Callie's bedroom, rising to howls of misery that came closer. She appeared at the top of the stairs like a small ghost in her white nightdress, seeming to glow in the light from her nightlight floor plug on the landing. "How could you?" she yelled. "I told you to leave Mrs. Wilcox alone." She pelted down the stairs, snatched the toy up and disappeared into her room, slamming the door behind her. Oscar and I followed and flung the door wide. She was back in bed, the cover over her and the toy, breathing regularly. I began to cry. Was she sleepwalking? She must have put Mrs. Wilcox on the stair, returned to her room and come out again. Callie's only been home a few hours and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I ate a bit of my pizza but wasn't up to chatting over a drink, so Oscar and I had an early night. Although I was drained and sleep-deprived, my eyelids wouldn't stay closed and I kept starting awake, thinking I heard muffled sounds from our daughter's room 2 doors along the hall. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I tiptoed to her room to find out whether my imagination was simply working overtime. The landing was in darkness except for her nightlight glowing outside her door. As always, the door was ajar and, as I drew closer, I distinctly heard voices in there. Slowly and silently, I pushed the door open until I had a view of Callie's bed. It was to the right of the room, headboard against the wall in front of me. A finger of light slipped through the curtains to the left, illuminating her doll's house on the floor, her mermaid costume draped over the roof, and various bits of plastic littering the carpet. As I took all this in, something flickered on her bed. Callie's pale face was visible on the pillow, sound asleep. Then I realised I was gazing at my daughter through the back of a figure, hazy and white, sitting on the bed. It wore an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, pale hair scraped up under a white cap. I screwed up my eyes to see the figure more clearly, but it faded in and out like a candle flame in the wind. The figure was murmuring to my sleeping daughter, but I was glued to the spot, helpless, my spine water. I strained to make out the figure's words. "Good girl," it muttered over and over. "Good girl, good girl." "Do not touch my daughter! Get away!" I screamed at the top of my voice, but only a low croak came out. At the sound, the figure turned its head slowly. Bone-white face, 2 black hollows where the eyes should be, the nose cavity empty as though the flesh had been shoved in, a dark, yawning space instead of a mouth. Angry desperation radiated from the figure in waves. As it began to rise from the bed, I felt my legs go from under me as I slumped to the floor. Then Callie was crouched beside me, shaking my shoulder. "Mummy, Mummy, you're scaring me! Daddy's coming!" She clasped Mrs. Wilcox to her, and I thought I was going to faint again. Oscar helped me to bed, then stood up to see to Callie. I grabbed his arm and shook it urgently. "Take that stuffed fiend away from her, please!" Seeing the terror in my face, he said, "I will, as soon as she's gone off again. We don't want any more drama tonight." I didn't tell Oscar what I'd seen in Callie's room. Saying I'd just been overtired and hadn't eaten enough, I wanted to turn the experience over in my mind, decide what to do about it, what it might mean. In the morning, he told me, "The hospital replied late last night. They found Jilly Bobs. She'd been shoved down the back of Callie's bedside table. I know it's early, but I'll nip and get her now, before Callie wakes. That way we can hand her Jilly Bobs and hopefully she'll get all about that ratty monkey." We lived 5 minutes from the hospital, so it wasn't long before I heard Oscar's key in the door. He threw his car fob and Jilly Bobs on the kitchen table. "I have some bizarre news," he began, brow furrowed. "I got chatting to a nurse we met on Callie's ward the other day, the lady who looked close to retirement age. I said one of the nurses had given our daughter a present, and she told me staff weren't in the habit of doing that. When I described the monkey and explained that Callie called it Mrs. Wilcox right off the bat, the nurse gave me a strange look. There is a story, she told me, about a nurse who worked here in the 1960s. Cheerful woman with a husband and small daughter, whom her mother would care for while the nurse did her hospital shifts. She was at work one day when her mother took her girl to the park. They were both killed. A dust cart hit them while they were crossing the road. Our nurse never got over the shock and couldn't work with children anymore. She'd get angry and weepy at the mothers too. Much less was known about mental health then and how to help people. A year later, she fell out of a top-floor window here and died. We don't know if she did it on purpose or whether it was an accident. Taking my hands, Oscar sat me down. You don't need me to tell you what the nurse who perished was called. Thanks for listening to Hauntings at Dusk. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. Join me again in 2 weeks for another shiver-inducing supernatural story. New episodes on the first and third Friday of every month.